Okay, mic working. I see the little dots moving. Certainly don't need a repeat of the time I did an entire one of these and then there turned out to be no sound and I had to do it again. Okay, yes, I'm seeing the dots indicating that the mic is working. Act 2, Scene 2. Longest scene in the play by a fairly wide margin. More than 50% longer than 5.2, the last scene, would be the second longest scene in the play. Act 2, Scene 2 is actually the third longest scene in all of Shakespeare. In third place behind Act 5, Scene 2 of Love's Labour's Lost and Act 4, Scene 4 of The Winter's Tale. And in both of those cases, well, the long scene in Love's Labour's Lost is, of course, the end, right? The big finish, the play within a play. And 4.4, The Winter's Tale, kind of, although it isn't the end, it gets us from the middle to the end. It is a long series of events, several changes of tone, and when we come out of it, we're ready for the series of events that constitutes the end of the play. Here, we've got a monster long scene right at the beginning, almost. So I suppose the question we would start with is, why is Act 2, Scene 2 so long? Oh, fun fact before we continue, it is, of course, only the longest scene in the play as measured by the number of lines in it. 585 lines, an unusually long scene in terms of line count, page count. Going by the amount of time that is stated to elapse, it's actually Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet that is the longest scene in all of Shakespeare, because even though it's only about 175 lines long and takes about 10 or 15 minutes to play, at the beginning of that scene, a character explicitly states that the clock just struck midnight, and at the end of the scene, they explicitly state that the sun is coming up. So somehow in Act 1, Scene 1, like 5 hours goes by, even though it's just 4 or 5 pages long. So, I mean, maybe the ghost of Hamlet's father can make people lose time, like when they get abducted by aliens. Something to think about. Anyway, Act 2, Scene 2, why is it so long? I can think of 3 reasons. One, momentum, right? As I stated a moment ago, at this point in the play, it's still basically the beginning. The 5 scenes of Act 1 set up what the plot is, and in Act 2, Scene 1, you see it begin to thicken, but we haven't even seen Hamlet himself. We haven't even seen the main character since he had the conversation with his dad's ghost and received the plot of the play. So we're still feeling like it's more or less the beginning. But by the time we come out the other side of Act 2, Scene 2, we are right in the thick of it. It is definitely the middle of the play. So we have this roller coaster, the series of events that takes us from the thing basically just started to where we can't see where we started anymore. We're deep in the middle and totally obsessed and transfixed. Another possible reason, well, one reason for making any scene long is because you want people to forget about some stuff that was stated at the beginning of the scene, right? I mean, what happens at the end of a scene? You know, in the few seconds or whatever while they're shuffling scenery around before the next scene starts, you turn to your friend next to you and talk about it. If there's something that you want the audience to forget, right, something you need to tell them, and what we're talking about here is how to set up a good ending, right? General rules for good endings. You want to surprise people, right? If people see the end coming a mile away, then they say that the end of your story, your play, your movie, or whatever was predictable. That's a bad thing. But if there was no way in a million years that anyone could have figured out that that's how it was going to end, then people will say that your ending is totally random. That's also a bad thing. So, as a general rule, you want your ending to be something that, in principle, people could figure out, but somehow they don't. And then when they see it, they go, "Oh, of course, how did I not guess that that's what was going to happen? I'm so mad at myself." That's the sweet spot of endings, predictable in principle, but then in practice, rarely predicted. So you have to give people all the clues, but then make them forget that they heard the clues. And Act Two, Scene Two, very near the beginning of this long scene, is a place where we get another couple of clues about how it's going to end. More on that in a minute. But I think the most important reason why Act Two, Scene Two is so long, and it isn't as though, by the way, that there was no obvious place to break it. A change of location is often a reason to break a scene. It isn't necessarily the case that time has to have gone by. For example, in between Act 3, Scene 3, where Claudius is praying, and Act 3, Scene 4, the closet scene, the big fight between Hamlet and his mom, virtually no time can be seen to have elapsed. Hamlet basically leaves one room and runs up a staircase and walks right into the other room, but it's, one scene ends and the other begins because we have changed location. There's a location change in right about the middle of 2.2, where Hamlet moves from messing with Polonius indoors to messing with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern outside. If Shakespeare wanted to chop this into two scenes, that would have been the obvious place to do it. It's roughly in the middle, and there's a change of location. But I think that the main reason, in addition to momentum and hiding the clues about how the play is going to end, the main reason 2.2 is all one huge monster scene is that it is connected thematically. We have also been keeping track of, in addition to being a series of events, a scene is also often in Shakespeare, and especially in this play, thematically united. Some way that characters have of talking, or some metaphor keeps getting returned to and building on itself from the beginning of a scene to the end. And that's what we have going on here, with some idea of, I think the key word for Act 2, Scene 2 is concept, or conceive, or conception, and words of that stripe. So we're keeping our ears open for them throughout the scene. Anyway, 2.2 begins with the introduction of two new characters that Shakespeare added to the old legend, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. We are told that, or the king says to them in line 11, that they are being of so young days brought up with him. So they're presumably Hamlet's old friends from childhood or high school before he went off to college at Wittenberg and met Horatio. There's something about Hamlet we can all identify with. Once upon a time he had high school friends, then went to college and made college friends, and realized that compared to his college friends, his high school friends are kind of dumbasses, and he doesn't really like them anymore. They have been sent for to hang out with Hamlet, to try and cheer him up, but really, let's face it, to spy on him and to report back to the king. As soon as they get introduced and leave the stage to go seek out the Lord Hamlet, we get what we've been waiting for, based on how Act 2, Scene 1 ended. Polonius enters to announce that I have found the very cause of Hamlet's lunacy, he says in lines 48 and 49. And we're already laughing because, pursuant to the closing lines of 2.1, we know he's wrong, right? In the last scene, Ophelia burst into her father Polonius's room to announce that Hamlet had just burst into her room and was acting all freaked out. And Polonius wrongly concluded that not being allowed to see Ophelia anymore has driven Hamlet insane. This is a comic usage of dramatic irony. It's funny because we know the characters are wrong. We know what's actually bothering Hamlet, but they don't. We learned in the last scene, or we got used to the idea that, okay, Polonius is largely a comic character. We're supposed to be laughing at him, so we're excited to experience the schadenfreude of laughing at Polonius being completely wrong and knowing him taking way too long to be wrong. But we have to wait for it. The king is anxious too. Oh, speak of that. That do I long to hear. He responds at line 50, but Polonius tells him to hang on. Give first admittance to the ambassadors. My news shall be the fruit to that great feast. Well, what actually, no, wait, hear what the ambassadors returning from Norway have to say, and then I'll tell you about the cause of Hamlet's lunacy. So where, damn it, ambassadors, I wanted to hear Polonius be goofy and wrong. The result of this tease, we think Polonius is going to talk, and then, oh, no, wait, actually, let the ambassadors talk first, is that we're not really paying too much attention while Voltimand is talking, beginning at line 60. He returns with an update on the beef with Norway. We learned back in 1.2. Well, we learned in 1.1 that Fortinbras Jr., the son of Fortinbras Sr., who Ghost King Hamlet Sr. killed in single combat all those years ago, is grown up and wants revenge on Denmark and is raising a mercenary army. We learned in 1.2 that the King of Norway, Old Norway, is, well, pursuant to the term, old and probably doesn't want war. Claudius wrote a letter to him telling on young Fortinbras and thinking that Old Norway would put a stop to this Fortinbras Jr.'s revenge invasion business. Voltimand returns to explain that it worked. He sent out arrests on Fortinbras, who received rebuke from Norway and made vow before his uncle nevermore to give the assay of arms against your majesty, we're told in lines 68 through 71. Whereon Old Norway, overcome with joy, gives him his commission to employ those soldiers so levied as before against the Polak, with an entreaty herein further shown that it might please you to give quiet pass through your dominions for this enterprise on such regards of safety and allowance as therein are set down. So, in other words, young Fortinbras is not going to attack us anymore. He's not going to attack Denmark anymore. But Old Norway figured, as long as he's got an army already and everything, might as well go attack Poland. By the way, they'd like your permission to march that entire army right past this castle on their way to attack Poland. Nothing to worry about there. I'm sure they're telling the truth. Polonius certainly thinks that, that's the last we'll hear about this Fortinbras kid, stating this business is well ended at line 85. Now, we, the audience, had we been paying attention there, might have gotten some important information about how the play is going to end, but we weren't paying too much attention. Just like in any good mystery, right? The scene where they give you the clues, the scene where they give you the piece of information that's going to become important later, they also distract you from it somehow, so you don't remember that the guy said that. Shakespeare knew how to do that way back at the tail end of the 1500s. So right after Polonius's this business is well ended, we get what we came for in Act 2, Scene 2, Polonius being goofy and taking way too long to say something simple. My liege and madam, to expostulate what majesty should be, what duty is, why day is day, night night, and time is time, were nothing but to waste night, day, and time. Therefore, since brevity is the soul of wit, and tediousness of the limbs and outward flourishes, I will be brief. Your noble son is mad. Mad call I it, for to define true madness, what is't but to be nothing else but mad? Now, we've heard the expression brevity is the soul of wit before, like to thine own self be true, Polonius's other famous line from 1.3, it's become proverbial. But just like that other famous line in context, it's ironic. Polonius is talking about how you shouldn't take too long to say something while taking too long to say it. It's a bad idea, essentially, to take too long to say something. There are many reasons and examples for why it is a bad idea to take too long to say something. The first of which is, get the joke? Okay. Even the Queen shuts him down. More matter with less art in line 95. Okay. He then introduces his theory that what's actually bothering Hamlet is that Hamlet is in love with his daughter Ophelia. He produces a letter, an old love letter that Hamlet had written to Ophelia, that Ophelia dutifully turned over to her father. Presumably, this was written before the play started. He quotes from it, line 116. Doubt thou the stars are fire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love. Dear Ophelia, I'm ill at these numbers, I have not art to reckon my groans, but that I love thee best, etc. Now, something to notice here, in addition to the fact that, Hamlet is much more eloquent virtually every time he speaks than he apparently is when he's writing love letters to his girlfriend, or I suppose ex-girlfriend by now. It's difficult to believe this was written by Hamlet. It's the least eloquent we ever see him. Are we to assume from this that he suddenly got much more eloquent and well-spoken in his state of depression since his father's death than he was before his father died, that the death of his father somehow made him smarter? Interesting. But here's something even more interesting. Look what he swears by. Doubt thou the stars are fire, doubt that the sun doth move, but never doubt I love. In other words, I swear I love you by the fact that the sun revolves around the earth. Now, in the Middle Ages, when the play is set, because remember, Hamlet is set as long before Shakespeare's own time as Shakespeare's time was before ours, right? Shakespeare's a little over 400 years ago relative to us, and the play is set a bit over 400 years ago relative to Shakespeare's time. So this idea that what was called the geocentric model of the solar system, the idea that the Earth is in the middle, as the Bible, well, it doesn't state, but implies several times. It never quite comes out and says, the Earth is in the middle and everything goes around it, but we can infer that the writers of the Bible thought so. Anyway, rather famously, this had been recently proven not to be true at the time that Shakespeare is writing this play. We most associate the proof that it's actually the sun that's in the middle with Galileo, who, interestingly enough, is born in the exact same year as William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare and Galileo Galilei, both born in 1564. They never met each other, of course, but presumably would have heard of each other. Now, Galileo didn't really get into the heliocentrism business until about 10 years after Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. So if a joke about the sun rather than the earth being in the middle of the solar system is intended here, which I think it is, Shakespeare wouldn't have been thinking of Galileo and his famous imprisonment for saying so when he planted this Easter egg that actually came a couple of decades later, but would have been thinking about Copernicus and the hot new theory would have actually been Tycho Brahe's little discussed these days theory that all the other planets go around the sun, but the sun is going around the earth, kind of trying to hedge his bets and do a 50-50 of what Copernicus had said and what scripture implied. Brahe dropped that theory in 1588. Would have taken a few years to get to England, so probably would have been the hot astronomical news or astronomical debate of the day, as Shakespeare is putting the finishing touches on Hamlet. In any case, this was something that was being debated, so the audience hears that and goes, wait, he swears he loves her by the fact that the sun revolves around the wait, so that's not true, but everybody thought it was true at the time the play is set, so does that mean he loves her or not? It is yet another one of those, does Hamlet, or did he ever, really love Ophelia? Two ways of taking it, jokes, like his the secondhand story about his bursting into her room in 2.1. Are we supposed to believe that this was a genuine display of overflowing emotion, or was he putting that on just so she would go and tell her dad, who would go and tell the king? It also reminds us, to come back to the play's running references to education, right? And how it sometimes prepares us very ill for the challenges of real life, right? The difference between being quote unquote educated and actually knowing what the truth is. A line like this reminds us that the truth changes. I mean, the actual truth does not change, but what people consider to be the truth changes as history progresses. So in this play, where people are so obsessed with the truth, the secret known only to Hamlet of what the real explanation of his father's death was, everybody else being obsessed with trying to figure out what's really bothering Hamlet, and doing all these tests and hiding behind things to find out what's really on his mind. It's 2.2 that really gets the momentum going of this being a play where everybody is constantly spying on everybody else and setting up traps for everybody else and peering out from behind things to try and figure out what's going on with everyone else. It is a play about trying to get at the truth. Just about a page later, after some more goofy overspeaking by Polonius, he repelled a short tale to make, fell into a sadness, then into a fast, thence to a watch, thence into a weakness, thence to a lightness, and by this declension into the madness wherein now he raves. Look what Polonius says around line 158. If circumstances lead me, I will find where truth is hid, though it were hid indeed within the center. Meaning presumably the center of the earth. But because he doesn't finish, Shakespeare doesn't have him finish that sentence. We get once again an echo of this parallel between the truth and the center, right? The hot scientific debate of the day was what's at the center of the solar system, or in the terms of the time, the entire universe, since they didn't know there was anything beyond that. What's at the center, the earth or the sun? Polonius echoes that idea a page after that visual is introduced. I will find where truth is hid, though it were hid indeed within the center. And they come up with the plan of having Ophelia go into a room where Hamlet is, while they are hiding behind some stuff to spy on him. This is Shakespeare's version of a minor aspect of the old Hamlet Scandinavian legend, the idea that in order to figure out whether the prince is actually mad, they send a woman to tempt him. That character, who's not even named in the original legend, just a brief reference to being tempted by a woman, Shakespeare fleshes out into one of his most eternally famous and iconic female characters, Ophelia. Speaking of Hamlet, he finally enters at around line 168, reading a book. And he then gets to do what we quickly realize is one of his favorite things, messing with Polonius, pretending not to know him at first. Do you know me, my lord? Excellent well. You are a fishmonger. Not I, my lord. Then I would you were so honest a man. Their exchange from lines 172 through 76. Hamlet then references another iffy scientific theory of the day in lines 181 through 185. For if the sun breed maggots in a dead dog, being a good kissing carrion, have you a daughter? He asked Polonius. I have, my lord, Polonius responds. Let her not walk in the sun. Conception is a blessing, but as your daughter may conceive, friend, look to it. Now, what Hamlet is referencing here is the theory of, as it was called, spontaneous generation. The medieval and Renaissance idea that little creepy crawly things, maggots and flies and whatever, spontaneously spring into existence when the sunlight hits rotting flesh. Eventually, it was figured out that those things reproduce and lay eggs and hatch from eggs. It was just that the eggs are very, very small and we couldn't see them. Now, unlike the geocentric model of the universe, which was already in the process of being conclusively overthrown as Shakespeare was writing, spontaneous generation was not disproven in any authoritative sense until about 60, 70 years after Shakespeare's death, and wasn't fine. And the last vestiges of belief in it weren't completely crushed until Louis Pasteur in the 19th century. But there were objections to it, even during Shakespeare's career in the late 16th century. Interestingly, not just scientific objections. It wasn't like geocentrism versus heliocentrism, where the religious people say one thing and the science people say another. With spontaneous generation, there were scientists who believed it, scientists who didn't believe it, religious people who believed it, and other religious people who didn't believe it because they didn't think God would do anything so gross as have life arise out of rotting flesh. So there were both scientific and religious objections to the theory of spontaneous generation that Hamlet references here, with the sun breeding maggots in a dead dog. Now, it appears to be something of a running joke in this play that Shakespeare has characters reference scientific theories that were iffy or outmoded or in the process of being outmoded in the elapsed time between the medieval period and the Renaissance. As far back as Act 1, Scene 2, Claudius tells Hamlet that for your intent in going back to school in Wittenberg, it is most retrograde to our desires. Now, that word itself, retrograde, comes to us from astronomy, from the infamous, I suppose, at this stage, theory of retrograde motion. The idea that planets go backwards sometimes. Of course, they don't, but they look to us sometimes like they do, since we're on, for example, we on Earth are on the inside track, and Mars is on the outside track around the sun. Every once in a while, when we start to, gain on Mars, it looks to us like Mars is going backwards. And for many, many centuries, rather than admit that the scripture was wrong and it's actually the sun that's in the middle, not the Earth, people tried to fudge that math by saying, Mars just goes backwards sometimes. And this was called retrograde motion. So the geocentric model, with that doubt that the sun doth move business, retrograde motion back in 1.2, spontaneous generation here. Shakespeare is continually tossing out references to exploded or exploding scientific theories to remind us that, even if you are a very educated person by the standards of your day, even if you are someone who knows everything according to what is known at the time that you happen to be alive. You might everything you think you know might turn out to be wrong in the future. A very long view, sobering reminder of the, I suppose, futility of the quest for knowledge in this play, in which every character is sneaking around trying to get at the truth, trying to obtain, to possess the truth, to come up with means, with methods for obtaining it, as Hamlet famously does at the end of this scene, since our very long Act 2, Scene 2 is all heading towards his famous declaration that the play is the thing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now, the other thing, somewhat less philosophical, the other somewhat less philosophical thing that these lines do, of course, is possibly confirm that Hamlet and Ophelia's relationship was sexual before the play started. This, let her not walk in the sun, your daughter may conceive, could be a, ha ha, I screwed your daughter joke that Hamlet is making to Polonius, who he's pretending not to recognize. After all, we've known since he first spoke back towards the beginning of 1.2, how much Hamlet likes to pun on sun, son, and son, son. So possibly doing that again here. Hamlet is famously reading words, 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 he states in line 191. Expanding upon that by declaring that the matter he reads is slanders, sir, for the satirical rogue says here that old men have gray beards, that their faces are wrinkled, their eyes purging thick amber and plum tree gum, and that they have a plentiful lack of wit together with most weak hams. All which, sir, though I most powerfully and potently believe, yet I hold it not honesty to have it thus set down, for yourself, sir, shall grow old as I am, if, like a crab, you could go backwards. Now, in today's terms, this is Hamlet making a joke about what we would today call, I suppose, political correctness. Just as, in Act 1, Scene 3, William Shakespeare proves that he knew perfectly well what mansplaining was, even though that word did not yet exist. Here, he proves that he understood what we mean when we talk about political correctness. In other words, things that you're not supposed to say, not because they're false, but because they are not nice, right? The idea that old men have gray beards, that their faces are wrinkled, they have weak hams. These things are not nice to say, perhaps, but are also all true. So when Hamlet says, I hold it not honesty to have it thus set down, he is using an ironic definition of the word honesty, right? The difference between the truth, painful though it may be, and what society expects you to say or expects you to act like you believe in order to fit in or to be polite. Reminding us of Polonius's own "Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act" advice, departing advice to his son from back in 1.3. Now, Polonius famously responds to this with the aside, "Though this be madness, yet there is method in it," in line 203, whence our expression, a method to his madness. But in terms of the thematics of this scene, I think what he says next is even more important. In line 206, how pregnant sometimes his replies are. A happiness that often madness hits on, which reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of. So echoing that pun on conceive, right, from the spontaneous generation, son, breed maggots and a dead dog, conception is a blessing, as your daughter may conceive. Polonius continues this very extended metaphor or parallel between conceive in the sense of creating life. For a woman conceives a child, or conception can mean the beginning of pregnancy. But we also use the word conceive for an idea, right? You think of an idea. An idea is born. A concept is conceived up here in this part of the body, just as a new person is conceived down here and using those parts of the body. So there's a running parallel there between creating people and creating ideas, or creation, conception in both senses of the word. That idea, I think, is the grand thematic metaphoric unity of the very long Act 2, Scene 2. Polonius has enough of Hamlet's Hamleting and walks away at line 218. Enter Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They act like they're here for absolutely no reason at all. But it takes Hamlet about 10 seconds to realize that they are actually here to spy on him. But before then, let's see. Okay, here's a line that's always fascinated me. Line 245. What have you, my good friends, deserved at the hands of fortune, that she sends you to prison hither? Prison, my lord? Denmark's a prison. Then is the world one, a goodly one, in which there are many confines, wards, and dungeons, Denmark being one of the worst. They respond, we think not so, my lord. Hamlet responds, why then 'tis none to you, for there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. To me, it is a prison. Now, he's got a lot of famous lines, and that's one of them, not among the most famous, perhaps, but you hear people quote it. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I think it's very much an open question how that line should be delivered. Is Hamlet serious when he says that? Or is he delivering that line sarcastically? Hamlet, thus far, has certainly appeared to be a believer in what we would today call objective truth, rather than in what we would today call relativism. He is very concerned with what God does or doesn't want, with the rules of the afterlife, with some idea of ultimate and immutable, unchangeable truth. We heard him just a couple of pages ago making fun of an idea of polite propriety, or what we would today dub political correctness. In short, he doesn't seem like he actually believes that, quote, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. In other words, that all truth is subjective. Well, in short, I think he should say that line in a funny voice, like he's making fun of the idea of believing that, rather than as though he really does. Okay. The next page or so of their interaction can basically be summarized as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, what are you guys here for? We're here for absolutely no reason. You guys are here to spy on me, right? Yes, we're sorry. And who's spying on whom immediately flips by around line 286. My lord, we were sent for, Guildenstern confesses. And Hamlet then begins the process of enlisting them as his spies. I'll tell you why, so shall my anticipation prevent your discovery, and your secrecy to the king and queen molt no feather. Now, what follows is one of Hamlet's more famous speeches. It is not, although you sometimes hear people mistakenly refer to the what a piece of work is a man speech, to the I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth speech, as a soliloquy. It technically isn't one, because there are other people on stage and he's speaking to them. though frequently, and I think appropriately, in the playing, this is often staged as though Hamlet starts off talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but by the end of it, you know, completely forgets about them and is addressing the speech to no one in particular. So I guess it could be regarded as a sort of soliloquy, even though there are two other people standing right there. Now, not simply because it is brilliant, but because I've got some stuff to point out about it, I'll quote it in full. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appeareth nothing to me but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express, admirable in action, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me. No, nor women neither, though by your smiling you seem to say so. One of my favorite things about the speech is the fact that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern apparently invent the Beavis and Butthead giggle around line 303. Hamlet concludes the speech with this noble "man delights not me," meaning, mankind, that he takes no delight in mankind. Apparently, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern sort of turned that into a gay joke by "man delights not him," laughing at that, and he whirls around and busts them on it. Okay, but before that, we have on the surface, the English language's most eloquent description of depression and what that feels like, all of the color, all of the joy going out of life and out of things that you used to enjoy. But it is also one of the many places in the play where through the speech, through the words of Prince Hamlet, Shakespeare slaps us out of our suspension of disbelief by reminding us that it's a play. Like he did with, you hear this fellow in the cellarage, or whilst memory holds a seat in this distracted globe, to 1 Scene 5, both those phrases making reference, reminding people, that what they're looking at is actors on a stage while they sit in seats in a theater. This description here, this goodly frame, the earth. Okay, well, the earth, the synonym for the globe, which was a frame theater, seems to me a sterile promontory. In other words, a dead, overhanging cliff, right? That's what a stage is. It's a promontory. A few more steps and Hamlet will fall off. It's sterile in the sense that the wood it's made out of, the trees are dead. This brave o'erhanging firmament, a poeticism for the skies or the heavens or the welkin from which the stars are hung. But if the actor playing Hamlet is gesturing upward, it would seem like he's referring to the proscenium arch, right? That curvy, pointy thing they have over a stage, so the sound carries, would be an overhanging firmament. The majestical roof fretted with golden fire, that was how the arch was painted in Shakespeare's Globe. It had these swirling stars and suns on it. So he's describing the stage, describing not the actual natural world that he is supposedly in, because we're supposed to be using our suspension of disbelief to imagine that he is outside. It's as though Hamlet is starting to notice that he's on a stage. It's like the guy's so smart, he's figured out that he's a character in a play. wait, is that a proscenium? Holy crap, is this a stage? You know, and in the middle of a speech about depression, that makes it seem like all the colors gone out of life. These things, the world doesn't seem real to him anymore. Well, indeed, the world around Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, is not real. It is painted scenery. So his depression and his uh, fie upon the uses of this world is an accurate description of the fact that the world around him is in fact sterile, is in fact fake. He's a character in a play, and it's all painted scenery. So by the time he gets up to in line 297, what a piece of work is a man. Now, this has become an expression today, meaning somebody's a character. Man, that guy's a real piece of work. But here, it's being used in the religious sense. A man, mankind, right, is a piece of work by God. 100 pounds of dust, right, referenced explicitly with this quintessence of dust. Right, the idea that the Lord took 100 pounds of dust and breathed life into it. So man is a piece of work by God. But this is not the only time the phrase piece of work is used in this play. Look for it again in 3.2, right before the play within the play. Hamlet asks, "Will the king hear this piece of work?" referring to the play. So a couple of scenes from now, we have that expression used again to refer to a play written by humans, just as it is used here to refer to humans themselves, which are the work of God. This scene, of course, is culminating in Hamlet's famous declaration that the play is the thing, and so this chain of creation, right? Of creating a person versus creating an idea, right? Conceive versus conceive, and now we're bringing God into it, right? With this chain of God creates William Shakespeare, who in turn creates Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, right? William Shakespeare is a piece of work by God, and Hamlet is a piece of work by Shakespeare. They then inform him that if you delight not in man, what Lenten entertainment the players shall receive from you. They inform him that this acting troupe that Hamlet really likes is coming to offer you service, coming to the castle to put on a play. Now, this seems to be the first thing in the play that genuinely cheers Hamlet up. In the speech beginning at line 312, "He that plays the king shall be welcome. His majesty shall have tribute to me. The adventurous knight shall use his foil and target," etc. He runs through all of the standard roles in, and types of roles and types of actors in an acting troupe and what one might expect from them. Now, it can be played more than one way. Of course, Hamlet could be faking his happiness here, but I don't think so. I think his delight in theater, even beyond the idea that it can provide a means by which to catch the conscience of the king, I think is genuine, and one of the deepest dwelling things that make Hamlet Hamlet. This quickly turns into the play's, I suppose, most famous and most extended anachronistic joke. When Hamlet asks why those actors are all the way out here at Elsinore rather than in the city, cleverly not mentioning what city he means, How comes it? Do they grow rusty? Rosencrantz explains, nay, their endeavour keeps in the wonted pace, but there is, sir, an aerie of children, little eyases, that cry out on the top of question, and are most tyrannically clapped forth. These are now the fashion, and so berattle the common stages, so they call them, that many wearing rapiers are afraid of goose quills and dare scarce come thither. In other words, no, they're as good at putting on plays as they always were, but they can't get work in the city anymore because some jerk with an acting troupe of children is putting on plays, and that's such a hot new trend that everyone's buying tickets to see these plays with kids in them, and these real actors can't get work anymore. Now, Shakespeare's initial audience would have recognized this as a friendly dig, as a diss track against his rival Ben Jonson, who at that time was in an effort to compete with Shakespeare in terms of ticket sales, putting on plays where all the actors were children, and for a while that was popular, and was giving Shakespeare and his Lord Chamberlain's men a run for their money. Now, but this isn't just an anachronistic joke at Johnson's expense. It also, I think, serves to, and this is where things get really weird, serves to imply that these actors who are on their way to Elsinore Castle in the Middle Ages are somehow Shakespeare, and Shakespeare himself and his own acting troupe, the Lord Chamberlain's men, right? If they had to leave the city, is that supposed to mean Copenhagen, or is it supposed to mean London? It's deliberately unclear. It implies that the actors we can expect to enter the play a few pages from now are the acting troupe that is actually putting on this play, the Lord Chamberlain's men, Shakespeare's actors. Okay, that conversation ends with Hamlet, again, famously, declaring that I am but mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw, in line 367. In addition to providing the title for Alfred Hitchcock's great film, it also makes us wonder, if Hamlet is just going to keep telling everybody he's not really crazy, what is the point of pretending to be crazy? He knows these guys are here to spy on him. Why tell them that it's just an act? What's the point? He goes to all the trouble of making a plan and then ruins his own plan. Anyway, Polonius re-enters. My lord, I have news to tell you. Hamlet responds by mocking him. My lord, I have news to tell you. When Roscius was an actor in Rome, the joke there being that in order to deliver the simple piece of news that the actors have arrived, Polonius would presumably have to start back in ancient Rome and give you the whole history of acting first before getting to the point. The joke goes over Polonius's head, and he then gives us again a famously goofy advertisement for the actors that have just shown up. The best actors in the world, either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, comical, historical, pastoral, tragical, comical, historical, pastoral, scene, inevitable, or poem unlimited. Seneca cannot be too heavy, nor Plautus too light. For the law of writ and the liberty, these are the only men. Now, we giggle at this part generally just because it sounds so goofy, this tragical, pastoral, comical, pastoral, historical, comical, pastoral. But what Shakespeare is joking about here is the idea of there being genres at all, right? Types of story. You've got this kind of story called a tragedy, right, where that works according to these rules, and this other type of story that's called a comedy that works according to these rules. And indeed, in his own lifetime, and for a while after, in literary criticism, going, as as late as the mid 1700s, there were still people who criticized Shakespeare for not following the rules, writing tragedies that didn't follow the rules of tragedies, comedies that didn't follow the rules of comedies. Um, and I think Shakespeare, and he appears to be putting it down right here in black and white, was not simply unschooled in these rules, but didn't care about them because he knew that life doesn't work that way. It's not as though life is either a sad story that ends with everybody dead, or a funny story that ends with everybody married. You've always got some sad stuff and some fun or optimistic or lovey-dovey stuff going on at the same time. And so he had his plays work that way. Even the comedies are often, moving or philosophically profound in parts, increasingly so in terms of the later comedies like Twelfth Night, or As You Like It, as opposed to the earlier ones like Taming of the Shrew or Comedy of Errors, which are more farcical or goofy. And even more characteristically, the tragedies have funny parts. Most centrally, the tragedy we're discussing right now, Hamlet. I mean, even though it's this famously bleak story about the most famous depressed guy of all time, and it does, spoilers, end with pretty much everybody dead. It's also arguably Shakespeare's funniest play, just in terms of the number of moments in it where we laugh out loud if it's done well. Um, and I think, and certainly, if we do subscribe to the theory that what Shakespeare is setting up in these very pages that we're discussing at the moment, what he's setting up is a cameo by himself as himself. Then we can take this as a deliberate sort of Shakespeare giving the middle finger to this idea that one has to either write this type of story, that type of story, or that type of story. Pastoral, tragical, comical, etc. You can just write a play that does every damn thing under the sun. There's the sun again, all at once, and just call it Hamlet. Okay, the actors enter on the next page, and Hamlet seems to be, again, I think his joy here is genuine. I think Hamlet is messing with the other people on stage 90% of the time that there are other people on stage. Here, I don't think he is. When he runs up to the actors around line 409 with this, "You are welcome, masters, welcome all. I'm glad to see thee well. Welcome, good friends." Shaking their hands, hugging them. I think it should be played as genuine. Now, this was, modern audiences might need to be reminded, ludicrously socially inappropriate for Shakespeare's time, and even more so for the Middle Ages. Right, actors, as you may have heard, were not respected. Acting was not a respected profession in Shakespeare's time. Actors were not even allowed to be buried in regular cemeteries, in sanctified ground. Gosh, now that I hear myself say it, a quibble about who does or doesn't get to be buried in sanctified ground does come up later in the play, so keep your ears open for that. Actors had to be buried in special, bad person cemeteries with prostitutes and whatever. So for a prince to run up to a bunch of actors and be like, "Oh my God, I love you guys, let's hug it out," it would have been very, very improper, even in the 1500s, and unthinkable in the 11th century when the play is presumably set. Now, this is one of the things, though he does have his flaws, one of the things that we like about Hamlet, especially in terms of modern ethics, his disregard for propriety. That he is, as the saying goes, no respecter of persons. That he's going to judge you by whether you're, a good person who's good at what you do, rather than because you have a high rank or station in life. Though they are quote unquote not noble, he respects the actors because, in his opinion, they are good at what they do. He even starting at around line 434. Tries to show off to them. If it live in your memory, as he's requesting this speech by them. One speech in it I chiefly loved, 'twas Aeneas' tale to Dido, thereabout of it especially me speaks of prime slaughter. If it live in your memory, begin at this line. Let me see. The rugged Pyrrhus, like the Hyrcanian beast, 'tis not so, it begins with Pyrrhus. The rugged Pyrrhus, he whose sable arms, black as his purpose, did the night resemble when he lay couched in the ominous horse, etc. And does, half the speech himself, showing off to the actors that he has it memorized. Hamlet, in short, is acting here the way we might imagine someone acting today when they see, a movie star on the street and freak out. Oh my God, it's so and so. I loved you in this movie and I loved you in that movie. My favorite part was when you said this. That's how people react to famous actors today, right? Post 20th century and Hollywood and the idea of the movie star. Well, I guess even in the 19th century, you had celebrity actors even before films. But in Shakespeare's time, and certainly in the medieval era, it would have been unimaginable for a prince to fanboy like this over a bunch of actors. Shakespeare knows he's writing something absurd. Speaking of Shakespeare, that is very possibly, in terms of when the play was originally put on, who we are seeing Hamlet say this to, right? If it's Shakespeare's acting troupe that has come to Elsinore, as implied by the foreshadowing that the reason they had to leave the city and come all the way out here was because they were being outcompeted by the child actors, implied to be Ben Jonson's company. Then at line 410, when Hamlet goes up to the lead actor and says, old friend, why thy face is valanced since I saw thee last. What the audience may originally have been seeing is, William Shakespeare walk on stage as William Shakespeare, right? Dressed as himself, as people in London would have known him to look. And Hamlet walking up and saying, hey, what, my old friend, what's up? Saying this to the author of the play, right? Hamlet meets Shakespeare in Hamlet by Shakespeare. And for people who are like the late, great Harold Bloom, who was so in love with the theory that what's called the Hamlet, right? We know that there was another play about 10 years earlier that has not survived, put on in London about Hamlet, right? That famously bombed, right? The people made fun of how much it sucked, and it was never printed. And no record of who it was by survives. Some people speculate that it was actually when Shakespeare was very young and had first come to London, that it was Shakespeare's first play, that for whatever reason he had always been obsessed with the legend of Hamlet, and that he wrote a first version of Hamlet 10 years earlier when he was in his early 20s. That bombed, and that he then revised it into the play we have today. Now, this line, if we take if we agree with the idea that the original staging was that Shakespeare as himself walks onto the stage, and Hamlet says this to him, then the line, "Old friend, thy face is valanced since I saw thee last. Comest thou to beard me in Denmark?" could be a clue about the attribution of the so-called Hamlet. Old friend, thy face is valanced since I saw thee last. Since I saw thee last could be taken as meaning since the last play you wrote about me, that one that everybody hated 10 years ago. You've grown a beard since then, right? So Hamlet seeing Shakespeare, right, for the first time since he saw him last would be since the last time Shakespeare brought him to life by writing a play about him. The last time the two of them met, right? The last time Shakespeare conceived this same piece of work. Hamlet then shuts up. The lead actor, possibly Shakespeare as himself, and since we do know that Shakespeare himself played the ghost, that would be a nice parallelism, right? The idea that Shakespeare is the ghost, then Shakespeare is the actor, and then in 3.2 for the play within the play, Shakespeare, as himself is the player king. In the play that we learn at the end of this, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, makes this speech about the end of the Trojan War. Troy is in flames. Pyrrhus, the son of Achilles, is about to kill King Priam, but the collapse of Ilium, possibly a dig at Marlowe here. Marlowe's most famous lines, was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium, right? Was about the Ilium, the keep or the highest tower in the city of Troy, coming down in flames at the end of the Trojan War. This might have been the moment where Shakespeare finally knew, okay, but up until now it was a matter of taste, but with this play, I'm finally, officially, forever better than Marlowe. Like, no one's going to argue about that anymore. And so he has, possibly as himself in the play, this speech that obliquely references Marlowe's most famous line about the topless towers of Ilium burning. As that's happening, it takes prisoner Pyrrhus's ear, for lo his sword, which was declining on the milky head of Reverend Priam, seemed in the air to stick. So as a painted tyrant Pyrrhus stood, and like a neutral to his will and matter did nothing. So we have a speech about somebody freezing and being unable to kill a king, in this play that is famously about somebody over and over and over, for whatever reason, freezing and being unable to kill a king. Polonius at line 483 interrupts the actor. This is too long. This outrages Hamlet, who responds with one of the play's best insults. It shall to the barbers with your beard. In other words, it's better than you could do. Reassuring the actors that this Polonius guy just has no taste. Prithee, say on, he's for a jig or a tale of bawdry, or he sleeps. Say on, come to Hecuba. The actor continues, but who, woe, had seen the mobled queen? Hamlet, liking the phrase, repeats under his breath, the mobled queen. And Polonius, wanting to kiss up to the prince who is of higher station, pretends to change his opinion of the writing and says, that's good. Mobled queen is good. Now, in the context of the speech, this refers to Queen Hecuba of Troy, the wife of Priam, in Homeric legend, fleeing the burning city muffled and disguised. Right? Mobled queen would mean masked or muffled queen. Now, Shakespeare repeats, as he does with murder in 1.5, or with words earlier in this scene, repeats it 3 times just to make sure we're noticing it. Moblid queen, moblid queen, moblid queen. Now, although Gertrude is not on stage, it makes me think of her, right? Because remember, we still don't know, and we've been wondering since Act 1, Scene 5, what exactly she did. The ghost seems to think she did something. Taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught, leave her to heaven and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. Hamlet takes it on faith that she did something, exclaiming, most pernicious woman, before he even exclaims, villain, villain, smiling, damned villain. Right after he hears the ghost's news, he's madder at his mom than he is at the guy he's told did the murder. But we don't know exactly what, if anything, Gertrude did. Again, like they used to say about, to paraphrase what they used to ask about Watergate in the 70s, what did the Queen know and when did she know it, is the central question of the play. She's the one we're trying to read, right? She's the one whose secret, whose center, whose truth we are most obsessed with getting out. She's the big question mark of the play. She is the real moblid queen, the real masked queen. So in context, it's about Hecuba, but it makes us think of Gertrude. Hamlet instructs Polonius at line 506 to show the actors to their room. Good my lord, will you see the players well bestowed? Do you hear? Let them be well used, for they are the abstract and brief chronicles of the time. After your death, you were better have a bad epitaph than their ill report while you live. Commenting on the centrality of theater, of art, in a way that we suspect was more in line with William Shakespeare's own opinion than anything that a medieval Scandinavian prince would actually have thought realistically about actors and acting. Polonius responds, my lord, I will use them according to their desert. In other words, I will show them to the rooms appropriate to their station in life. Presumably not very good rooms, since they're only actors. Hamlet is outraged and responds, God's bodkin man much better. Use every man after his desert, and who shall scape whipping? In other words, hey, if we gave everybody what they deserved, we'd have to, deep down, everybody is really such a terrible person that we'd have to kick everybody's ass up and down the street all day, every day, and have precious little time left to do anything else. Use every man after his desert, and who shall escape whipping? We're all sinners. We all deserve to be punished. So instead, use them after your own honor and dignity. The less they deserve, the more merit is in your bounty. In other words, treat them and treat people in general better than they deserve, and God will reward you for it. Now, at this point in the play, we think, oh, what a nice thing to say. Yay, Hamlet. Well, what a nice speech about mercy and not judging people too harshly. It sounds good when he says it now, but well, remember that the guy he's saying this to is Polonius. This will eventually become deeply ironic. Anyway, Polonius shows the actors to their rooms, and as they're leaving, Hamlet takes aside the first actor, possibly takes aside William Shakespeare. Man, if I could go back in time and see something, the moment of the play when Hamlet comes up and puts his arm around William Shakespeare and whispers to him, dost thou hear me, old friend? Can you play the murder of Gonzago? Aye, my lord. We'll have it tomorrow night. You could for need study a speech of some 12 or 16 lines, which I would set down and insert in it, could you not? Aye, my lord. So we know that the play they're going to put on is something called The Murder of Gonzago, and that Hamlet plans to modify it, insert a speech of some 12 or 16 lines. Now, knowing Hamlet, a 12 or 16 lines is probably an extreme lowball. When he gets going, he tends to go on. So possibly what he ended up inserting is considerably longer than that. So one thing, we file this away, and one thing we're wondering in Act 3, Scene 2, when we see the play within a play, is how much of this are we supposed to believe Hamlet himself wrote? Possibly all of it, and this would then lead to the amazing. I mean, you can't even call it a joke. It goes so far beyond being a mere joke. If we're supposed to take the first player as being Shakespeare himself, who then gets into costume and plays the player king in the play within the play in Act 3, Scene 2, that means what we're seeing in Act 3, Scene 2 in the play within a play is William Shakespeare starring in a play written by Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Since, the rest of the time we're seeing Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark in a play by William Shakespeare. Anyway, everybody leaves, and 2.2, this monster scene, this endlessly rich and amazing and goofy monster scene, third longest in all of Shakespeare's work by number of lines, ends with Hamlet's messiest soliloquy, the "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I" speech, where he is shamed by the fact that the actor was able to get up so much emotion, right, about this story that's not even real. Famously asking, "What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her?" Right? Now, of course, this is simply how acting works, but it does raise a broader philosophical question. Why are we typically so much more moved by art than we are by real life? We can, you can be watching a movie and there'll be a scene where a dog dies and you'll be weeping, even though it's only a dog and it's just a movie and a dog didn't even really die. The movie ends, you turn on the news, you can see on the news that somewhere else in the world 200 people died, and you go, "Oh, that's too bad," but you don't cry. For whatever reason, art affects us more than real life does. It shouldn't be that way, but well, what a piece of work is a man. Is it not monstrous that this player here could force his soul so to his own conceit? Hamlet asks. There's that word conceit again, with this endless scene-spanning pun of conceive, conceit, conception, in line 533. Hamlet contrasts this with himself. This guy got up so much emotion about a fake story, yet I, whose real dad was really murdered, have not done anything about it yet. Or as Hamlet puts it, yet I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like John a dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing, no, not for a king upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat was made. Now, unpregnant is not a word you hear every day. I mean, most of the time it goes without saying. Hell, I'm unpregnant right now. But it relates to the double meaning of conceive, right? Conceive can mean to create a person, to conceive a child, or to believe in something like a concept. So Hamlet takes a term for the other sense of conceive, right? Just as Polonius did much earlier in this scene, where he said, right after his more famous line, "Though this be madness, yet there is method in it," he said how pregnant sometimes his responses are. A happiness which often madness hits on, that reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of. So the double incorporation of terms to do with pregnancy, right? How pregnant sometimes his responses are, meaning not literally pregnant, but how much meaning they seem to have. A happiness that often madness sits on, which reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of, using the same verb we use for the other kind of pregnancy. We talk about a woman delivering a baby. Here, we talk about an idea or someone's word, someone's speech being pregnant, and then that pregnant speech eventually being delivered of a meaning after it has gestated in our minds for a while as we interpret it. Now, this is, of course, a description of what poetic speech is like. It might seem to be very difficult or even nonsense at first. The meaning might not be readily apparent. As Shakespeare famously observed in an earlier play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Theseus, towards the end, observes that the lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. So this is not the only play where Shakespeare remarks upon the similarity between poetry, the poetry of the poet or the playwright, and the mad speech of the lunatic. Both might appear to be meaningless at first, and then the more you think about it, eventually a meaning appears. Eventually a meaning is delivered, right? Just like with the other kind of conception, nothing is apparent at first, but eventually a new human being is delivered. Hamlet unites those two meanings with the curious and rarely used word unpregnant in line 548. Totally should have killed this guy by now. And then coming up with the plan in 568. I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. Referring hundreds of years early to the Perry Mason moment, where the guilty guy can't stand it anymore and leaps up and confesses. Hamlet attributing it not to the clever questions of a skilled lawyer, but to a well-done play. Guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. He's heard that when people who have secretly done something wrong see a play, that where what they've done is somehow reenacted in it. They can't stand it and they jump up and confess. For murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. Now look at how that reminds us of Hamlet's closing words in the first scene where he appears, back in Act 1, Scene 2. Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes. In other words, if somebody has done something wrong, eventually they'll be found out. Now, we took this at the time as a sort of faith in divine justice, in God seeing to it in some karmic way that the bad will be punished and the good rewarded. But Hamlet didn't specify exactly how that happens. How is it exactly that foul deeds will rise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes? Here he specifies one way it might happen is as the result of a play. And we do, we can all identify with this idea. Hopefully, very few people watching this video have ever murdered their own brother and then married his wife. But we've all, on a lesser scale, had the experience of we've recently done something we're ashamed of, and then purely by coincidence we happen to see a movie or an episode of a TV show where a character does something like that, and we go like, oh god, like we have to look away, even if no one else in the room knows that we did the thing that was or even if we're alone, we still can't stand to look at it. It does have an effect on us. Now, the reason this needs to be done at all is worthy of remark here. I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle. I'll observe his looks. I'll tend him to the quick. If I do blench, I know my course. If he looks guilty during the play, I'll know he's guilty and I'll kill him. Wait a minute. Why do you suddenly need proof? You didn't before. Look what Hamlet goes on to say here. The spirit that I have seen may be a devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. I'll have grounds more relative than this, with an obvious pun on the word relative. Um, okay, makes sense. You don't want to just run up to a guy and stab him without proving he did it first. But this is the first time we've heard any doubt on Hamlet's part about Claudius's guilt. Back in 1.5, it is an honest ghost that we have seen. That let me tell you, for your desire to know what is between us, or master it as you may. He tells the other guys when they catch up to him, that was definitely my dad's ghost. I don't want to hear any more about, oh, maybe it was the devil disguised as my dad. I know my father when I see him, and that was him. Now Hamlet's the one saying, maybe it was the devil, maybe it wasn't really my dad. Is this actual doubt, or is it cold feet doubt? Right. That is eternally, more so as the play goes on from this point forward, the question with Hamlet. Are his excuses logically valid, or is he just making up reasons why he can't do it yet, simply because he's scared? And he then famously concludes that the play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. Now, compare these rhyming closing lines to Hamlet's other concluding rhyming couplets from 1.2 and 1.5. They form a chain of reasoning, a progression. Right? Back in 1.2, it was foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. Right? If someone's done something bad, they'll be found out and punished. But he doesn't say how. The implication is God will do it or something, I guess. Then in 1.5, it's the time is out of joint, O cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. And now he's bringing himself into it. Oh, God's not going to do it while I sit on the couch and eat chips. I've got to get up and go do it myself. Right? God might guide me, but I have to be involved. But how exactly do I do this? How do I see to it that foul deeds will rise? And how do I set right the time that is out of joint? Now he tells us how. The play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. So by, as Polonius would say, by this declension, by comparing these three rhyming couplets, we can see a progression whereby acting, well done art, plays become the instrument of God's justice here on earth. Right? It is the only means of overturning the social order, of extracting the secret from a medieval king. Right? Claudius is a medieval king, someone with absolute power. His word is law. He controls the army, the courts, the everything else. No court can try him. No one can even accuse him. What has power over this guy? It turns out art does. The lowest ranking characters in the play, the actors, right, who Polonius thought did not deserve good rooms a couple of pages ago, like Stratego, where the the lowly spy is the only piece that can kill the marshal. It's the actors who have power over the king, over the top piece, the highest ranking character in the play. So a very, in keeping with Christian theology, sort of Jesus-like reversal of the mighty and the meek, of the rich and the poor, with art, with playing, with a lie that reveals the truth, right? Which is what a play is, right? Like Polonius's bait of falsehood takes this carp of truth back in 2.1. Now Hamlet is trying to do exactly that. take a carp of truth with a bait of falsehood, but rather than do it in a dumbass way like Polonius did, sending Ronaldo to Paris to spread rumors that his son gets drunk and bangs hookers. Hamlet is doing it in a, considerably more philosophically advanced way, putting on a play. It is technically a lie in the sense that none of this really happened, but, I can think of very few things that, in some higher sense, reveal the truth more deeply and more fully than the words on these pieces of paper do. So I suppose we'll stop there. See you in the next video for, we've got To Be or Not to Be coming up next in Act 3, Scene 1. See you then.